Welcome to Studies with Stearman. Join us as we look deeper into the Bible. Strengthen your faith with us, even as we see the day approaching. And now, here's Gary.
We're going to continue with our discussion of the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24:32 and following. We're talking about the fig tree parable, and today the illustration of the days of Noah in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24:36. Remember the three key concepts of Bible study. You remember what they are? Context, context, context. And the context of Matthew 24 is Jesus answering the disciples' questions concerning their deepest hope, which is the overthrow of the Gentile world powers and the rise of the kingdom. And they ask him, when's this going to happen? Because this is the biggest thing in their mind. They want the kingdom to come, and they want the Gentile world powers to be overthrown as prophesied by the Old Testament prophets. So Jesus answers them. And he is answering in the context of Israel. The church is nowhere in Matthew 24. Well, it may be tangentially present in some ways, but we'll see. We had just finished talking about the parable of the fig tree and this generation. We spent quite a bit of time a week before talking about what this generation means. This generation, in the context of Israel, is the fig tree generation genetically. That is, it is the 12 tribes, but it is also the elect. It's the spiritually elect from among the 12 tribes. When Jesus addresses the generation, he's addressing the generation that will go into the kingdom. He has just finished talking to them about birth pangs, the abomination of desolation, the great tribulation, the disposition of the elect, and he mentions in context, verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened. So he's placing all this in a time bracket. Now, it's very important to remember verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, because there is a before, during, and after when you're talking about the tribulation. The before we're all interested in right now because everybody wants to know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, what's going to happen to the church. Understandable. The during, a series of carefully timed events happened during the tribulation. Jesus says immediately after the tribulation of those days, there's going to be a cataclysm of the sun. We talked about that. Zechariah mentions it. Now, when we drop down to verse 36, where we'll start today, he says, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. That's one of the most misquoted verses in the entire Bible. It is often quoted by skeptics, people who are skeptical about the study of prophecy in any way, shape, or form, saying it's a waste of time, it's all going to happen when it happens, pie in the sky, forget about it, everybody's got a different opinion, don't waste your time, etc., etc. They say, besides, only God knows, so what good's it going to do you to study prophecy? And they quote, but of that day and hour knoweth no man. Okay, what is that day and hour? That day and hour is the second coming of Christ at the end of the tribulation. Context. That's all he's talking about. He's not talking about the rapture of the church or the church at all. He's talking about Israel. In fact, specifically back in verse 16, he's talking about Judea, which, by the way, is the territory just north of Jerusalem, going all the way up the eastern flank of the mountains of Israel over to the Jordan River. It's called Judea. It's a geographic location. And he's talking about what will happen to the people living at that time. At which time? At the time of the Great Tribulation and the abomination of desolation. And at the end of the tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light. So that's the context. Verse 36, but of that day and hour knoweth no man. No, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. What day and hour? The coming of Christ at the end of the tribulation. He has just finished talking about it up here in verse 30. And then he says, and we touched on this last week, but as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. There is a very important word in those verses. Verse 39, the word all. You need to emphasize that in some way with a check mark in the margin, circle the word, whatever you want to do. That is an important word, the word all. It doesn't say he took some of them away. It says he took them all away in the flood. And Peter says that they were all taken away except 8 souls. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18 and following, if you want to flip over there, we have Peter discussing this event. For Christ, this is 1 Peter 3:18, for Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit, by which also he went and preached unto the spirits in prison. Why were these spirits in prison? Well, Peter tells us. Because a long time ago, essentially is what verse 20 is saying, which a long time ago were disobedient, when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was preparing, wherein a few, that is 8 souls, were saved by water. Now, if you believe the Bible, you believe in a worldwide flood, you believe in the ark of Noah, you believe that only 8 souls were carried to safety and that everybody else on earth died. Boy, that stretches credibility, doesn't it? Really? Well, it's just a local flood, maybe, right? Not if you believe the Bible. And this is the problem with faith. Well, my faith is pretty good until I read this, and then I think, well, I'm not sure about whether this is true or not. And besides, if I believe this is true, and if I go around telling about it, they'll think I'm an idiot. So your ego's on the line here. What do you believe? Earth covered by water, 8 people and a bunch of animals in a boat that landed on top of the mountains of Ararat. I believe it. And there's a lot more where that came from. Now, Jesus went and preached, that is, proclaimed his victory. Keruzo is the word. He proclaimed his victory to the spirits in prison. Why would he do that? Why would Jesus go and proclaim his victory to these spirits in prison? And by the way, the spirits were in a very special lockdown. 2 Peter 2:4 says, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be received unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and so forth and so on. He's saying God had basically got to do justly, and he began with the angels. God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell. The Greek word in 2 Peter 2:2 is tartaros, which is the deepest, darkest. It is solitary confinement in hell. Hell is bad enough, but can you imagine solitary confinement in hell? That's where these evil angels are. And these evil angels did what? Well, we know because we've discussed it. These evil angels corrupted antediluvian mankind. And we have looked at various sources. I quoted 2 the last time we met. One, Plato, the other, the book of Enoch, in which the angels, for example, Semyaza and Azazel, 2 of the angels that were named, came down and gave men forbidden knowledge and took human wives and set themselves up a regular dynasty on earth. All of the writings of the old world corroborate this fact. It has not been fashionable to preach this. In fact, some Christian preachers preach that when the sons of God came to the daughters of men, took wives of all that they chose, they're really talking about the sons of Seth. But no, that's not true. Contextually, it has to be fallen angels corrupting mankind. So when we look at Matthew 24:38, for as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Now it's a second coming that's being discussed here. They knew not, that is, they did not realize the spiritual truth of what was about to happen to them until the flood came and took them all away. I keep stressing the word all for a good reason here. Because verse 40 says, then two shall be in the field, the one shall be taken, the other left. Two women shall be grinding at the mill, the one shall be taken, the other left. Watch therefore. He's saying this to the house of David. Watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord doth come. But know this, that if the good man of the house, and by the way, this good man of the house in the Greek is oikodespotes. Oikodespotes in Greek means the master or the keeper of the house, the owner, the boss, if you will, the person who runs the house. But if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched, he would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. And the coming there is to Israel. The coming that's being discussed is to Israel, not to the church, because this is simply not written to the church. So we're talking about the second coming of Christ at the end of the tribulation under horrific conditions. In a minute, we're going to look at some of the Old Testament prophecies that speak of this and try to put together a scenario, a layout that will help us understand this prophecy. Now, Jesus goes on, and he's talking here to the disciples, and he's talking by proxy, if you will, to Israel at large. And he asks a question, which is, what every good rabbi does. You teach by asking questions. Who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Verily I say unto you that he shall make him ruler over all his goods. But, and if that evil servant shall say in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunken, the Lord of that servant shall come in a day when he looketh not for him, and in an hour that he's not aware of, and shall cut him asunder, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. What you read behind the scenes or beneath the text of this whole thing is bad days. Jesus is talking about the bad days that Israel will have to go through just before the second coming of Christ. Bad days in which judgment will fall, and it will be exactly like it was before the flood came and took everybody away. Well, what is this business about two in the field, one taken, one left? Two women grinding at the mill, one taken, the other left. To me, that's describing the conditions that will exist at the time of the tribulation. It won't make any difference who you are. Jesus is kind of talking about a chance happening here. Things are going to be rough. You won't know exactly whether you're going to get hit or not, but they're all going to get hit in one way or another. He says it'll be just like the flood. Everybody will be judged, but the conditions will be strange, almost arbitrary, almost accidental. Two in the field, one taken, one left. Two grinding at the mill, one taken, one left. He's saying you won't know what hits you until it hits you. That's basically what he's saying in context. And then he goes on with this parable of the two servants, and he's talking about an evil servant who begins to hit his fellow servants, to eat and drink with the drunken. These are bad days. These are days, as described in the book of Revelation, when there will be earthquake, famine, pestilence, megadeath. Over half of the population of the earth will die. The rest will be starving, searching around for food. It will not be a good time to live. And the idea here is that In that day, it's going to require every ounce of faith you have in order to live as Christ would have you live, so that when he returns, you'll be blessed and not cursed. The bad conditions of the tribulation. If you can survive that and live a godly life, he's saying, when I come back, I'm going to make you ruler over all your goods. Now, what are the conditions going to be like in the tribulation? Turn back to Joel. Daniel, Hosea, Joel is the sequence. If you can find the book of Daniel, then Hosea, and then Joel. Book of Joel, said to be the oldest of the written prophecies delivered to the house of David, written in the 9th century BC, just after the reign of David and Solomon. So this is a very early prophecy. And the whole prophecy is dedicated to the tribulation period, the day of the Lord. It's interesting to me that the earliest prophecy written to Israel will be dedicated to the last event before the kingdom. And Joel says, we can't read the whole book, but we'll pick out some key passages. 1:15, alas for the day of the Lord is at hand, and as a destruction from the Almighty it shall come. Jeremiah 30 talks about it, calls it the time of Jacob's trouble. Remember, we looked at that a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it's been more like a month ago. Time flies. Wow. Chapter 2 of Joel. Blow ye the trumpet in Zion. Sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand. Jesus names the day of the Lord. He is the Lord. He calls it the Great Tribulation. In fact, Jesus and John in Revelation call it more than the Great Tribulation. They call it in the Greek tis thlipsis, tis megalis, the tribulation, the great one. That's what both John in Revelation and Jesus call it, the tribulation, the great one. It's going to happen right out of the mouth of Jesus. He says the tribulation, the great one, is coming. It is the day that all the prophets talked about, beginning with Joel. Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, sound an alarm in my holy mountain. By the way, where is Zion? Downtown Jerusalem. That's what it is. All you have to do is read the Bible. Where's the holy mountain? Downtown Jerusalem. It's in the Bible. And notice what Joel says. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. As the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and is strong. There hath never been the like, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. He then goes on to describe an invading army. Well, this invading army is described by Ezekiel. The invading army is described by Daniel in chapter 11. The invading army is described in the book of Revelation. I mean, everybody talks about the invading army. The Jews talk about the invading army, the battle of Gog and Magog and so forth. So the context here of Joel, he's talking about the tribulation. He's saying sound an alarm. How do you sound an alarm? How do you blow the trumpet in Zion? Back in the old days, they used silver trumpets, and there would be a guy standing on the pinnacle of the temple blowing a big, long silver trumpet about 4 feet long. But today, to sound a trumpet in Zion, you just throw a switch. And these big sirens start. They go around and around at the top of a pole. It's called an air raid warning siren. And everybody get into your sealed rooms and into your subterranean bunkers, et cetera, et cetera. Very contextually true. Look at Joel 2:15. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sanctify a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the people, sanctify the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children, and those that suck the breasts. Let the bridegroom go forth out of his chamber, and the bride out of her closet. We'll come back to that one in just a minute. Now turn over to Joel chapter 2, verse 31. For something that we need to look at. Joel 2:31. The sun shall be turned into darkness, the moon into blood, before the great and the terrible day of the Lord come. By the way, Revelation talks about that in chapter 8. Did you notice a key word in that passage? Let me read it again. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before. Ooh, that's interesting. The great terrible day of the Lord come. In other words, before the tribulation period, there's going to be a time of geophysical difficulty. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered, for in Mount Zion and Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord hath said, in the remnant whom the Lord shall call. And then finally in Joel 3:14, multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. Valley of decision is an idiom that is used for Emech Jezreel, the valley of Jezreel, which lies just below Mount Megiddo. And Mount Megiddo in Hebrew is called Har Megiddon. And when you say that in English, it's Armageddon. So the valley of decision is a key idiom that refers to Armageddon. Multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and moon shall be dark and the stars shall withdraw their shining. All of this is a pre-tribulational warning. This is the oldest written prophecy to Israel, and it's written to the elders of Israel to warn them what to do when they begin to see the signs. What would be the signs? The signs in the sun, moon, stars, distress of nations, various other signs that Jesus gives in the Olivet Discourse. In that day, the Jews are going to read the words of Jesus with great interest, I assure you. Today, the Jews are not so interested in what Jesus said because, to them, he's just another guy, a nice teacher, maybe. One day, they'll be very interested in reading the Olivet Discourse before the tribulation. Turn now to Malachi. In fact, the very last words in the Old Testament. Just find the beginning of the New Testament, the end of the Old Testament, go to Malachi chapter 4. Malachi talks about this same thing. Malachi 4, for behold, the day cometh. This is the great and terrible day of the Lord. Behold, the day cometh, it shall burn as an oven. And all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall be stubble. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings. He shall go forth, grow up as calves of the stall. Ye shall tread down the wicked. For they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet in the day that I shall do this, saith the Lord of hosts. Here, the Lord, in his coming, is referred to as the Son of Righteousness, S-U-N. It's an interesting grammatical fact in the Hebrew language. The word for servant is shamash. But if you just change the vowels slightly, shemish, it becomes the word for son. So Jesus came as the shamash, the servant, but he's going to come back as the shemesh, the son of righteousness. People worship the sun. The Greeks worshiped the sun god Apollo. By the way, Apollo was one of those angels that got locked up in the bottomless pit, and he's going to be released. Now, what I'm saying to you could earn me considerable ridicule among the intelligentsia, but it's in the Bible. Apollo was an angel. The Greeks said that he was the sun god. He got locked up. He's locked up right now in prison. But in Revelation chapter 9, the bottomless pit's going to be opened up, and Apollo is going to reemerge and plague men on earth. What can I say? It's in the book. I have to tell it like it is, even though I may sound like a madman. What, Apollo coming back again? You're not serious. It's true. Apollo was the old sun god of the Greeks. There was Re. A lot of people call him Ra, the sun god of the Egyptians. You've seen the solar disk with the wings and the little lines coming down from the sun, with each one having a little pointer at the end of it. That was the sun god. He was called Re. We honor his name every time we speak scientifically. I don't mean that Re either. I mean Re, the sun god, from which we get our word for a light ray. Isn't that fascinating? The persistence of language is one of the most fascinating things to me in the whole wide world. For example, the Egyptians were very good with lotions, potions, and nostrums. I mean, they could mix up everything from embalming fluid to perfume to you name it. They were chemists. You know what the name of their country was? We call them Egypt. And the Hebrews call them Mitzrayim, but they call themselves Chem, from which we get our word chemistry. Isn't that fascinating? That's just a side note. I just love that. But that shows you how the Bible works too, because there is persistence of ideas in the Bible in amazing ways. The Son of Righteousness, this time the real Son. He won't be Re, and he won't be Apollo, and he won't be any of those other sun gods. He's going to be the real one. And he's going to come as the Son of Righteousness. There's only one of those. And you shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet, in the day that I shall do this, saith the Lord of hosts. And now comes an interesting prophecy. Remember ye the law of Moses my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb for all Israel, and with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. He shall turn the heart of the fathers to children, the heart of the children to the fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. The Jews refer to this prophecy and refer to this great and dreadful day of the Lord as Yom HaModim. And they talk about the battle of Gog and Magog being tied together with Yom HaModim, Judgment Day. And they say that Elijah is going to come back and that he's going to do battle against the enemies of Israel called Gog and Magog on Judgment Day. Malachi says, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Okay, that's two things we have now that are happening before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Remember back in Joel? There's going to be disruption in the sun, moon, and stars. There's going to be a gathering army before the tribulation. Malachi, in the last prophecy of the Old Testament, says, I'll send you Elijah before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. So get this picture. You have rampaging armies beginning to develop their strength. You have some kind of disruption in sun, moon, and stars. You have the arrival of the prophet Elijah, who is coming to do battle for Israel. Well, that's an amazing kind of a contextual mix we have there. In other words, once you begin to put together these seemingly disparate ideas, you develop an environment that's very interesting. Now let's turn to Micah. Today is Bible Find a Book Exercise Day. You go back 2 or 3 prophets to Prophet Micah. Micah talks about this same period of time. And again, Micah is speaking for the nation Israel. Micah chapter 7. Woe is me, for I am as when they have gathered the summer fruits, the grape gleaning of the vintage. There's no cluster to eat. My soul desired the first ripe fruit. The harvesting of the summer fruits is code language, as we know from several places in Scripture, for the end of the age. Jesus, in one of his first sermons, says the harvest is the end of the age. The harvest festival is the festival of Pentecost, the end gathering. Woe is me, for I am as when they have gathered. The Hebrew word there is osaph, which means to harvest. When they have gathered the summer fruits as the grape gleaning the vintage, there's no cluster to eat. My soul desired the first ripe fruit. Here's a man in distress, Israel in distress. And he says, the good man is perished out of the earth. Perish, and we've seen this several times, but it's always worth repeating. The word perish in Hebrew is avad, and it means to disappear. So literally it's saying the good man has disappeared out of the earth, and there is none upright among them. They all lie in wait for blood. They hunt every man his brother with a net, that they may do evil with both hands earnestly. Now that's serious evil. The prince asketh, that is the ruler of the land, says, and the judge says, give me a reward. The prince asketh, and the judge asketh for reward. In other words, new taxes. Give me some money. And the great man utters his mischievous desire. In other words, there's no honor among leadership. And so they weave it together. In other words, they sit down, they talk about it, and say, here's what we're going to do. So you have here a picture of conspiratorial conniving. They weave it together. The best of them is as a briar, the most upright is sharper than a thorn hedge. The day of thy watchman and thy visitation cometh, now shall be their perplexity. Now this is the same watchman and visitation spoken of by Joel, the great army. It's the same watchman and visitation spoken of by Ezekiel, Gog and Magog. Same watchman and visitation spoken of by Micah, by Jeremiah. Here, the word watchman in Hebrew is mitzafeach, translated watchman. But mitzafeach means to look toward the north, for the northern army. I never miss an opportunity to stress this, because all through the Bible, the invading army that comes and invades Israel is called the northern army. And in fact, the northern army is the army mentioned by Ezekiel. Joel mentions the northern army and how it's going to be deflected when it comes upon Israel. Now let's turn to Zephaniah. And what we're doing here is building a picture of the events that Jesus is talking about in the Olivet Discourse. Turn to Zephaniah. Zephaniah, an early prophet, wrote just before the Babylonian captivity. And he spends a lot of time talking about the great and terrible day of the Lord. But I want you to listen to his language. It's the language that Joel, whom we looked at a minute ago, Joel was using this same language. Zephaniah 1:14, the great day of the Lord is near. It is near. Now, just like Joel, Zephaniah is saying, it's not here yet, but it's near. You remember Joel said, these things are going to happen before the great and terrible day of the Lord. Sound the alarm. In other words, what these prophets are doing is preparing Israel for a coming invasion that will surely happen, and then telling them in the process what will happen in the invasion. The fascinating thing is this. Listen. Great day of the Lord is near. It's near. It hasteth greatly. Even the voice of the day of the Lord, a mighty man shall cry there bitterly. It is a day of wrath, a day of trouble, distress, wasteness, desolation, day of darkness, gloominess, clouds, thick darkness, a day of the trumpet and alarm against the fenced cities, against the high towers. And I will bring distress upon men, that they shall walk like blind men, because they've sinned against the Lord, because their blood shall be poured out as dust, and their flesh as the dung. Neither their silver nor their gold shall be able to deliver them in the day of the Lord's wrath. This reminds us of the prophecy of James in the New Testament. James chapter 5, woe ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your gold and silver is rusted. It's worthless. And Zephaniah says the same thing. Neither their silver nor their gold shall be able to deliver them in the day of the Lord's wrath, but the whole land shall be delivered by fire, the fire of his jealousy, for he shall make even a speedy riddance of all them that dwell in the land. Yeah. Now, catch this. Zephaniah chapter 2. Gather yourselves together. Yea, gather together, O nation not desired. Back in Micah, we saw the word gather. I feel like I'm living the time when they have gathered the summer fruits, said Micah. Gather, the Hebrew osaf, means to harvest. Here's a different Hebrew word for gather. This is the word kashesh in Hebrew. Kashesh means to carefully bend over and pick something up and put it with a bunch of other similar somethings. So if you spilled, say, a box of shotgun shells and you wanted to bend over, pick them up and put them back in the box. That's the word kashesh. Gather yourselves together. Yea, gather yourselves together, O nation not desired. What would this nation be not desired? Would it be Israel? Before the decree bring forth, before the day passes chaff, this is the same time period that Joel was talking about. Before the fierce anger of the Lord come upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger come upon you, seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be that you shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. May be that you'll be hidden. If you read Revelation, you know that Israel doesn't bother to hide. But then in the middle of the great and terrible day of the Lord, about the 3.5-year mark, they have to run for their lives. And remember what Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse? He said, when you see the abomination of desolation stand in the holy place, let him who readeth understand. Then let them be in Judea flee for the mountains. He says, don't bother to pack a bag, just get out of there. That's what's going on here. It may be that you shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. On the other hand, this is before the tribulation. Before. What's he telling him to do? He's saying, get ready before all this happens. He's talking to Israel. He's saying, get ready before this happens. It would seem that we're living very close to these times described by Joel and Micah and Zephaniah and Malachi before the tribulation. Again, what's going to happen before the tribulation? There will be distress in the sun, moon, and stars. Elijah will come and do battle with the enemies of Israel. You know, Elijah is not mentioned at all by Ezekiel. There's nowhere in Ezekiel when Gog comes down and invades Israel that you read Elijah fights against the northern army. But in the context of Malachi and in Revelation, you say to yourself, well, he must. And it's fascinating that the rabbis teach that Elijah will lead the armies of Israel against Gog and Magog. You have to do a lot of reading between the lines in order to make this whole story come together. There was something that we read and just went right over. And I want to go over it again with you. Go back to Joel chapter 2. Joel chapter 2. He's sounding this pre-tribulational warning, saying, get ready, because it's coming. 2:15, blow the trumpet in Zion, sanctify a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the people, sanctify the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children, the little tiny babies, get everybody together, let the bridegroom go forth out of his chamber and the bride out of her closet. What is that? Somebody want to tell me what that's all about there? Well, you know what it reminds me of in context? Go back to Matthew 24, because this is a study of the Olivet Discourse, even though we've been doing a lot of page turning. You go back to Matthew 24 in context. Always remember the context. Matthew 24, the disciples say, what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the age? That is, the end of the times of the Gentiles. And Jesus then says, earthquake, famine, pestilence, beginning of sorrows, abomination of desolation, get out of town, don't bother to pack a bag. And after the tribulation of those days, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, the stars shall fall from heaven, and on and on. And then he gives the parable of the fig tree. He says, this generation shall not pass. And then he gives the illustration of the days of Noah, which we looked at. The days of Noah being days of absolutely horrific breakdown of society because of the intrusion of dark forces from the heavens, just like the movies today. You can't look at a movie preview these days that isn't some form of an invasion from outer space. Who are these invaders from outer space? Well, they came once before the flood. And they convinced everybody they were good guys, and they were not. And they were destroyed. And then Jesus gives the illustration of the two servants, which we read earlier on. Who then is a faithful and wise servant? He talks about a servant comporting himself in a certain way in order to receive a reward when the master returns. He's really talking about the horrible events within the tribulation. And then you come to chapter 25, which in our English Bibles means, hey, we're turning to a new subject. Not so. This chapter 25 is simply a continuation of his discourse. And what's he talking about now? He says, then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins. What does that word then mean? When? When you see the word then, you ought to say when. What's he talking about when he says then? Is he talking about the rapture of the church? No. He's talking about the period of time currently under discussion, the tribulation period. It's specifically the build-up to the tribulation. He's answering the question, saying, when you see all these things begin to come to pass, in other words, like Joel, like Malachi, like Zephaniah, he's talking about that period, the build-up to the great and terrible day of the Lord. And in that context, he says, then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins. 10 being a minion. 10 Jewish people constitute a minion or a quorum. So he's talking to Jews here. He's not talking to Gentiles at all. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins who took their lamps, went forth to meet the bridegroom. This reminds me of what Joel said back here. Blow the trumpet in Zion, gather the people. Let the bridegroom go forth out of his chamber and the bride out of her closet. Jesus is talking about the very same thing Joel's talking about. And 5 of them were wise, 5 were foolish. Half the group, wise. What does wise mean? Spiritually wise, spiritually awake. They that were foolish took their lamps, took no oil with them. By the way, it's dark. It's the midnight hour. And this is an idiom for the great and terrible day of the Lord, which is darkness and not light. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose, trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said unto the wise, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. But the wise answered, saying, not so, lest there be not enough for us and you. But go ye rather to them that sell, and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, now there's a fool's errand, if ever I've seen one. Go buy some oil at midnight. Whoa, stores are closed. That's the whole idea. When they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. Gruesome. Marriage supper and the chuppah are significant of the contract between God and Israel. And to be shut out of that contract is a very grim proposition indeed. Afterward came also the other virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, verily I say unto you, I know you not. I don't know you. Don't recognize you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour when the Son of Man cometh. What is this day and hour? Is this being directed to the church concerning the rapture? Not at all. This is written to Israel, who will be living through this horrific time, which is usually said to be 7 years long. Actually, it's going to be a lot longer than 7 years, because there are going to be some pre-tribulational difficulties, even as Joel said. Kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins which took their lamps. They went forth to meet the bridegroom. 5 wise, 5 foolish. This is Israel. The foolish ones have no oil. Oil is a type of the Holy Spirit. They don't have the Spirit. Oil, the olive oil, is a type of the Holy Spirit. The bridegroom is late. Or is he? Well, he knows when he's coming. We don't. Midnight, there's a cry made. He's here, he's here. Let's go out and meet him. And those who had their lamps ready went out. The others didn't. They had to go somewhere else. The wise answered, hey, there's only enough oil for us. And the others went out to buy. And they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. You know, just before the tribulation, Jesus says in Revelation, behold, I stand before you. Remember that in Revelation? Where he's just finished talking to the 7 churches, and he says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Any man hear my voice and open the door, I'll come into him, sup with him, and he with me. There's going to be a time when that door shuts. And that's when it gets really, really bad in the tribulation period. That, I believe, is what Jesus was talking about right here. And I believe it's what Joel was talking about. The bridegroom goes forth, the bride out of her closet. By the way, where's the bride in the Olivet Discourse here in chapter 25? Parable of the 10 virgins. And you notice the bride's missing? This whole story talks about the bridegroom, talks about the 10 virgins, talks about the bridegroom coming and those who are ready went into the marriage. Where's the bride? You know, the most important person at the marriage, right? It's the bride. Where's the bride? She's already in there. That's us. By inference, I really and truly believe that that's us. And there will be those of the house of David who are saved. There are those of the house of David who are saved, who are going to go in to the wedding. There are others who will be a bit late. The door will slam shut, and they're going to have to go through the tribulation period. You might say that the parable of the 10 virgins is Israel's view of the rapture. They get to look at it from the outside, while we're going to get to look at it from the inside. Well, would you believe we're out of time? We're going to have to stop right there. What Jesus was doing is what Joel was doing, what Micah was doing, what Zephaniah was doing, Malachi. He was saying, men, get ready. Don't get caught. He's saying that to Israel.